The 5E Instructional Model, a continuous story of discovery. The 5E Instructional Model, developed by the Biological Sciences Curriculum Study (BSCS) in the 1980s, is a teaching framework grounded in constructivist theory. It fosters inquiry-based learning through 5 phases: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. This framework encourages active student participation, building knowledge through experience and reflection. Let's follow the journey of Mrs. Aisha, a 5th grade teacher, as she uses the 5E model to teach her students about the concept of gravity. Engage, lighting the spark. Mrs. Aisha opens a lesson with an intriguing question. What is something you cannot see but is always around you? Students eagerly offer guesses: air, sunlight, sound. Building on their curiosity, she asks, why do things fall when we throw them up? What would happen if there were no gravity? This sparks a lively discussion. To hook her students further, she drops a ball and a pencil, asking, why do these objects fall to the ground instead of floating? As they speculate, she shares a motivational quote by Albert Einstein. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. This phase sets the stage for exploration by activating students' curiosity and linking the lesson to their prior knowledge. Explore, hands-on discovery. In the explore phase, Mrs. Aisha encourages students to investigate the concept themselves. She divides them into small groups, providing objects of varying weights and shapes: balls, feathers, and paper sheets. Their challenge: drop these objects from the same height. What do you notice? Does weight affect how fast they fall? The classroom buzzes with excitement as students conduct their experiments. One group observes the feather falling slower than the ball, while another notices crumpling the paper changes its behavior. The students engage in debates. Is it air that slows the feather? Mrs. Aisha facilitates without giving answers, encouraging students to share observations and ask questions. This phase fosters curiosity and critical thinking as students actively explore the concept of gravity. Explain, making connections. After the exploration, Mrs. Aisha gathers her students to discuss their findings. She asks, what did you observe during your experiments? Why do objects fall differently? Students eagerly share ideas, some attributing the feather's slower fall to air resistance. Mrs. Aisha listens and bridges their observations with scientific concepts. She explains, gravity pulls all objects toward Earth. However, air resistance slows lighter objects like feathers. That's why they fall slower than heavier ones. She reinforces this with videos of astronauts on the moon, showing how objects fall differently in environments without air resistance. To deepen understanding, she encourages students to summarize the concept in their own words. She ends the phase with a quote by Benjamin Franklin: tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. Elaborate, applying knowledge. In the elaborate phase, Mrs. Aisha challenges students to extend their understanding. She asks, imagine gravity on a larger planet or in space. How might it behave differently? Students work in groups to design experiments simulating different gravitational conditions. One group uses a bouncing ball to demonstrate weaker gravity, while another creates a model of life on a planet with stronger gravity. As they brainstorm, Mrs. Aisha asks thought-provoking questions. How does a planet's size affect gravity? How would life change on a planet with no gravity? Through this phase, students apply their knowledge creatively, linking it to real-world scenarios. They demonstrate critical thinking as they explore gravity's role in the universe. Evaluate, reflecting on learning. Finally, Mrs. Aisha assesses her students' learning through various activities. She asks them to present their models, write short reflections, and answer questions like, what would happen if gravity disappeared? How does air resistance affect falling objects? Students present their findings confidently, demonstrating their understanding. Mrs. Aisha provides constructive feedback and encourages them to reflect on their learning process. She concludes the lesson with a motivational thought. Assessment is the engine of inquiry. It tells us where we've been and where we can go. Reflections for practitioners. To implement the 5E model effectively, educators should consider the following reflective questions. 1. Engage. How can you connect prior knowledge to spark curiosity? What questions or demonstrations will hook your students? 2. Explore. What activities encourage hands-on discovery? How can you facilitate inquiry without providing direct answers? 3. Explain. How can you guide students to articulate their observations and connect them to scientific concepts? What tools or analogies can make complex ideas simpler? 4. Elaborate. What real-world problems or scenarios can deepen understanding? How can you encourage students to think critically and creatively? 5. Evaluate. What assessment methods can measure both knowledge and critical thinking? How can reflection be used to enhance students' understanding of their learning journey?